On a quiet Thursday morning in October 1999, 6-year-old Emily Harper disappeared from the sidewalk in front of her elementary school. 20 minutes earlier, she had been standing beside her older brother, waiting for the first bell to ring, swinging her backpack back and forth, and tracing shapes in the gravel with the toe of her sneaker. By 8:17 a.m., she was gone. No scream, no struggle, no witnesses who could say exactly what they saw. Just an empty space where a child had been standing seconds before. 15 years would pass before anyone realized the smallest detail from that morning had been written down incorrectly. And when one officer finally noticed it, the truth had been sitting in a dusty evidence box the entire time. This is the story of Emily Harper, and how a disappearance that seemed impossible slowly unraveled, because one person decided to look closer. Maple Grove, Indiana, had a population of just under 4,000 people in 1999. The kind of town where teachers knew every student's parents by name, where the police department had 5 full-time officers, and where the biggest news most weeks was a stolen bicycle or a loose dog wandering near the highway. The elementary school sat 3 blocks from Main Street, a low brick building surrounded by a chain-link fence and a playground that squeaked when the swings moved in the wind. Parents dropped their kids off along the curb every morning, and the crossing guard waved cars through with the same tired smile she'd worn for 20 years. Nothing dangerous had ever happened there. Not once. Emily Harper was 6 years old, small for her age, with straight brown hair cut unevenly by her mother in the kitchen the night before school pictures. She liked drawing horses and refused to wear anything except the same purple sneakers every day, even when the soles started separating. Her teacher described her as quiet but observant, the kind of kid who noticed when a classmate was sad and would quietly slide over half her crayons without being asked. She walked to school with her older brother Daniel every morning. Their house was 4 blocks away. The route was simple: 1 straight sidewalk, 1 stop sign, then the front gate. Daniel was 10 and took his responsibilities seriously. Their mother reminded him daily, "Don't let her run ahead. Don't talk to strangers. Walk straight there." Daniel followed the rules, always. That morning had started like every other. Their mother packed lunches at 7:10. Peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices, juice boxes. She tied Emily's hair back with a pink elastic that snapped twice before holding. Daniel checked the time on the microwave clock. 7:45. They left the house together. The air smelled like cold leaves and wet pavement. Nothing unusual. No strange cars, no unfamiliar faces. At 8:05, they reached the school sidewalk. Kids gathered in small groups near the fence. Some parents still talking. A few teachers unlocking doors. Daniel later told police Emily stood beside him for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, talking about a drawing she wanted to finish in art class. Then he looked down to tie his shoe. It took him maybe 10 seconds. When he stood back up, she wasn't there anymore. At first, he assumed she'd wandered toward the playground. Emily did that sometimes. He walked toward the swings. Nothing. He checked the front doors. Nothing. Then the bell rang and teachers started ushering kids inside. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. He ran home. Their mother thought he was joking at first. Then she saw his face. By 8:20 a.m., the first patrol car pulled into the school parking lot. Officer Tom Bennett stepped out with a notebook, expecting another simple misunderstanding. Kids wandered off all the time. They showed up at a friend's house or hiding under bleachers. He told the mother they'd find her in 10 minutes. They always did. But when they searched the playground, the bathrooms, the nurse's office, Every classroom, every hallway. There was no Emily. No backpack. No footprints. No one who remembered seeing her leave. The sidewalk in front of the school looked exactly the same as it had every other morning. Too open. Too visible. Too small for a child to vanish without someone noticing. And yet she had. By 9 a.m., Maple Grove wasn't a quiet town anymore. It was a crime scene. And somewhere, someone knew exactly what had happened during those 10 seconds Daniel bent down to tie his shoe. By 10 a.m., every officer in Maple Grove was either at the school or driving slow circles through nearby streets with their windows down, listening for anything that sounded like a child crying for help. Patrol cars idled at intersections that had never needed police presence before. Teachers kept students inside. Parents began arriving early, pulling their kids out of class with tight grips and pale faces. Word traveled faster than any siren. A child had vanished. Not run away, not missed the bus. Vanished. And in a town this small, that word felt heavier than it should have. Officer Tom Bennett stood beside the Harper family in the school office, flipping through his notebook, asking the same questions again and again, because sometimes the smallest change in wording shook loose a new memory. What time did you leave the house? Who else was walking nearby? Did anyone talk to her? Did she ever mention someone following her? The answers stayed the same. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Just an ordinary morning that had turned wrong without warning. Daniel kept replaying it out loud, over and over. Like if he said it enough times, it would make sense. She was right there. She was talking. I tied my shoe. Then she wasn't there. He said it so many times, the words stopped sounding real. Their mother sat stiff in a plastic chair, staring at the hallway, as if Emily might suddenly appear at the end of it, confused but smiling, like this was all some mistake. Bennett had worked missing children cases before. They usually ended quickly. 90% were misunderstandings. A kid walked home with a friend. A parent forgot a pickup. Once, a boy had fallen asleep behind the gym bleachers. But this felt different. There was something too clean about it. No chaos. No witness describing a struggle. No dropped backpack or scattered lunchbox. It was like Emily had stepped sideways out of the world. By late morning, the school parking lot was filled with volunteers. Neighbors who'd taken off work. Church members. Teenagers who barely knew Emily but wanted to help. They formed search lines across the park behind the school, walking shoulder to shoulder through wet grass and fallen leaves, calling her name every few seconds. Emily. 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 The sound echoed through the trees and came back empty. They checked drainage ditches, storage sheds, every unlocked car. Officers knocked on doors along the route Emily and Daniel usually walked. Did you see anything strange this morning? Any unfamiliar vehicles? Any adults talking to kids? Most people said no. A few mentioned the white van parked near the curb, but couldn't agree on whether it had been there before or if they'd just noticed it because they were looking for something to blame. In small towns, memory bends easily under fear. At noon, the state police arrived with tracking dogs. They brought one of Emily's jackets for scent. The dogs sniffed the fabric, circled twice, then led handlers straight to the sidewalk where Daniel said she'd been standing. From there, it tracked maybe 15 feet toward the curb. Then it stopped, sat down, confused, as if the trail simply ended. The handler tried again. Same result. Sent to the curb, then nothing. Like she'd been lifted off the ground. Bennett felt a tightness in his chest he didn't like. Dogs didn't just lose trails like that unless the person got into a vehicle, which meant someone had been close enough, bold enough, to take a 6-year-old child from directly in front of a school in broad daylight while parents and teachers stood less than 50 yards away. Someone who knew exactly how long they had. Someone who wasn't improvising. That realization changed the tone of everything. This wasn't a lost child. This was an abduction. By 2 p.m., yellow tape surrounded the sidewalk. Officers photographed every inch of pavement. They collected gravel, measured distances, bagged a single purple elastic hair tie they found near the curb that might have belonged to Emily, or might have been there for weeks. Evidence bags piled up with things that probably meant nothing but couldn't be ignored. Bennett wrote times carefully in his report. 8:05 arrival. 8:10 last confirmed sighting. 8:17 brother notices disappearance. He underlined 8:17 twice. 7 minutes. That was the window. Somewhere inside those 7 minutes was the answer. That night, the Harpers left their porch light on, their front door unlocked. Her mother placed Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit on the couch like she might come home and look for it. Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying those 10 seconds again and again, wishing he had just waited to tie his shoe, wishing he'd never looked down. And 2 blocks away, Officer Bennett sat at his kitchen table, studying the day's notes, unable to shake the feeling that something about the timeline didn't fit quite right. He didn't know it yet, but that feeling would follow him for 15 years. By the second day, Maple Grove no longer looked like a town. It looked like a command center. Satellite vans lined the curb outside the elementary school, their dishes tilted toward the sky like metal flowers. Reporters stood in winter coats rehearsing lines into microphones, while camera operators adjusted focus on the Harper house across the street. The same quiet block where kids usually rode bikes now had yellow tape, folding tables, and officers carrying clipboards. Neighbors who had lived there for decades said they'd never seen so many strangers at once. The air felt different, tighter, every sound sharper, every passing car suspicious. Officer Tom Bennett arrived just after sunrise with a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. He hadn't slept more than an hour. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image. An empty stretch of sidewalk where a child should have been. Missing kids did that. They crawled into your head and stayed there. Inside the temporary command post, a map of Maple Grove covered an entire wall. Colored pins marked searched areas. Blue for volunteers, red for officers, yellow for canine sweeps. By morning, nearly every block within a mile radius was already marked. Too fast, too thorough. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made Bennett uneasy. When you searched everything and still found nothing, it meant the answer wasn't lying out in the open. It meant someone had taken it with them. Detectives began reconstructing the exact 7-minute window between 8:10 and 8:17 a.m. They called it the gap. Everyone kept returning to it like it was a locked door that just needed the right key. Teachers confirmed the bell rang at 8:10. Daniel confirmed he bent down to tie his shoe immediately after. A crossing guard said she remembered seeing 2 kids standing near the curb, but hadn't looked again until a group of parents walked past her. No one remembered a scream. No one remembered running footsteps. No one remembered a vehicle door slamming. The absence of memory bothered Bennett more than any eyewitness account could have. Something that bold should have left noise behind. Instead, there was silence. They pulled traffic camera footage from the nearest intersection half a block away. Grainy, black and white, timestamp flickering. Cars passed, pickup trucks, a delivery van, a sedan turning right. Nothing that clearly showed a child or an abduction. But at 8:13 a.m., one frame caught Bennett's attention. A light-colored station wagon slowing near the curb for just a second longer than necessary. Not stopping. Not exactly. Just slowing. Then accelerating. The plate was unreadable, the driver's face hidden in shadow. It could have meant nothing. People slowed all the time near schools. But Bennett printed the frame anyway and pinned it to the board. Sometimes cases cracked because of something small that everyone else ignored. By mid-morning, volunteers were combing the wooded area behind the old baseball field. Officers checked storm drains with flashlights. Divers even scanned the shallow creek on the edge of town, though no one believed she'd walked that far. Every hour without a lead made the mood heavier. Parents kept their kids inside. Curtains stayed drawn. Stores closed early. The diner that usually buzzed with breakfast chatter stayed nearly empty. Maple Grove had always trusted itself. Now it didn't. That afternoon, Bennett visited the Harpers again. Standard procedure: re-interview the family. Sometimes grief loosened details that shock had buried. Emily's mother sat at the kitchen table surrounded by flyers. Hundreds of them. Her daughter's photo copied until the ink looked too dark. She was cutting them into neat stacks with a pair of scissors, movements slow and mechanical. Bennett asked if Emily had ever talked about strangers, anyone offering rides, anyone new around the neighborhood. She shook her head, said Emily was shy, said she barely talked to kids she knew, let alone adults. Daniel sat on the floor with his back against the couch, staring at nothing. He hadn't spoken much since yesterday. Bennett crouched beside him and asked again, gently, if he remembered anything else. Any sound, any smell, anything at all. Daniel hesitated. For a second, Bennett thought he might finally say something new, but then the boy just shook his head, said he only remembered bending down, and when he stood up, his sister wasn't there. That was it. Like someone had erased her. That word stuck with Bennett all the way back to the station. Erased. Not taken, not grabbed. Erased. As if whoever did this knew exactly how to move without leaving traces. That night, the search officially expanded beyond town limits. State alerts went out. Patrol cars covered highways. Checkpoints were discussed but never approved. The missing posters spread to gas stations 50 miles away. But as the sun set behind Maple Grove for the second time since Emily disappeared, Bennett stood alone near the empty sidewalk outside the school and stared at the exact spot Daniel had pointed to. 15 feet of concrete. Nothing special. Nothing different. And yet somehow, this was where everything had changed. He wrote one line in his notebook before heading home. If someone took her, they knew this place. They knew this time. And they knew exactly how long no one would be looking. He didn't realize then that this wasn't just a crime of opportunity. It was planning. And whoever planned it had been closer than anyone suspected. By the end of the first week, the search for Emily Harper stopped feeling urgent and started feeling procedural. That shift was subtle, but everyone in Maple Grove noticed it. The helicopters didn't come back after Tuesday. The volunteer sign-in sheets grew thinner. The folding tables outside the school were packed away. What remained were patrol cars, clipboards, and quiet conversations behind closed doors. The kind of work that didn't make the news. The kind that stretched for months. Detective work. The Harpers' living room had turned into a small war room. Flyers stacked on the coffee table. A legal pad covered in names of people they had already called. Churches, radio stations, truck stops, anywhere someone might have seen a little girl with brown hair and a purple backpack. Emily's mother slept on the couch most nights now, afraid to go to the bedroom in case the phone rang and she didn't hear it. Her husband barely slept at all. He drove back roads until 2 or 3 in the morning, headlights cutting through empty farmland, looking for something he couldn't even define. A shape, a movement, a miracle. Officer Tom Bennett kept returning to the same detail that had started bothering him the moment he saw it. The station wagon in the traffic footage. It wasn't dramatic. No screeching tires, no sudden stop. Just a slight hesitation near the curb at 8:13 a.m. Then gone. The kind of thing a tired officer might dismiss after a long shift. But Bennett had been doing this job long enough to trust the feeling in his gut. Real abductions rarely looked like movies. They looked ordinary. Too ordinary. He ran the image through every enhancement tool the department had. Brightness, contrast, zoom. Nothing clear. The plate remained a blur of gray. Still, he printed copies and started knocking on doors along Maple Street again. He showed the photo to anyone who'd been home that morning. Most people squinted and shook their heads. Could be anyone. Could be nobody. Around noon, he stopped at a small white house 3 doors down from the Harpers. Mrs. Donnelly, retired school secretary, answered. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything. Always watering plants, always watching the street. If anyone had seen something, it would be her. She studied the photo longer than the others, tapped the corner with one finger. "I saw a car like that earlier this week," she said slowly. "Not sure it was that day, though. Parked across from the school before classes started. Engine running. I thought it was a parent waiting." Bennett asked what time. She shrugged. "Around 8, maybe? Could have been earlier. I remember thinking it was strange because most parents park in the lot, not the street. It wasn't much. Not solid, but it was more than nothing." Bennett wrote it down carefully. Car idling near curb, before 8:10. That meant whoever it was might have been waiting. Waiting meant planning. Planning meant someone who knew the schedule. The school bell, the crossing guard rotation, the exact moment kids would be distracted. That narrowed things more than people realized. Random predators didn't plan like that. Someone local might. Back at the station, detectives began compiling a list. School staff, maintenance workers, delivery drivers, anyone who regularly passed through Maple Grove in the mornings. They pulled substitute teacher logs, bus schedules, utility company routes. The list grew long fast. Too long. Maple Grove wasn't a city, but it wasn't tiny either. Hundreds of people had reasons to be on those streets between 8 and 8:30. Still, patterns mattered. Bennett circled 3 names who owned light-colored station wagons registered in the county. 2 had clear alibis. 1 didn't. A man named Harold Pike, 42, part-time landscaper. Lived alone on the edge of town. No criminal record. No family. Bennett drove out to Pike's address that afternoon. A small ranch house with peeling paint and a gravel driveway. The kind of place you passed 100 times without remembering. The driveway was empty. No wagon, no car at all. Bennett knocked anyway. No answer. A neighbor said Pike left early most days for jobs and sometimes didn't come back until dark. Could be nothing. Probably nothing. But Bennett wrote the address down. Something about an empty driveway in the middle of a workday felt wrong. That night, the Harpers held a small candlelight vigil on the school lawn. Half the town showed up. People they barely knew hugged them like family. Someone placed Emily's photo beside a row of flickering candles. 8 years old, missing 1 week. The pastor said a prayer, talked about hope, talked about faith. The words drifted into the cold air and hung there. Bennett stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Daniel hold his mother's hand too tight. Kids shouldn't look that old, he thought. Not after only 7 days. As the candles burned lower, Bennett kept staring at the dark street beyond the school. Somewhere out there, someone knew exactly where Emily was. Knew whether she was scared. Knew whether she was safe. And they were sleeping just fine. That thought hardened something inside him. Cases went cold when officers got tired, when they accepted coincidence, when they stopped pushing. Bennett wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Because if Mrs. Donnelly was right, if that station wagon had been waiting before the bell even rang, then this wasn't random at all. It was someone who had watched those kids every morning. Someone who blended in so well, no one thought twice. And that meant the person who took Emily might still be driving those same streets every single day, passing the same houses, waving at the same neighbors, like nothing had ever happened at all. By the second month, the town stopped using the word search and started using the word investigation. It sounded colder, more official, less hopeful. Search implied you expected to find something. Investigation implied you were trying to understand why you hadn't. Maple Grove adjusted the way small towns always do. Slowly. Quietly. The yellow ribbons tied to mailboxes faded in the sun. The flyers on telephone poles curled at the edges. The news vans stopped coming after the third week. But inside the sheriff's office, the case file for Emily Harper kept getting thicker. Officer Tom Bennett read through it every night before going home. Every statement, every timeline, every photograph. He wasn't looking for something dramatic, just something small that didn't fit. Because in his experience, the truth rarely hid in big mistakes. It hid in ordinary details everyone else stepped over. The station wagon still bothered him. 3 light-colored wagons registered in the county, 2 cleared, 1 unresolved. Harold Pike. No prior arrests, no obvious connection to the school. No children, no spouse. No reason to be on Maple Street at 8 in the morning. Bennett checked employment records again. Pike did landscaping and odd jobs, seasonal work. Nothing scheduled that Monday morning. No invoice, no receipt. No client who remembered seeing him. It wasn't proof of anything, but it wasn't nothing either. Bennett drove past Pike's house twice that week. Once in the morning, once at dusk. The first time the driveway was empty again. The second time, a pale blue station wagon sat under a tarp beside the garage. He slowed without meaning to. From a distance, it looked similar to the one in the footage. Same long body, same dull paint, same roof rack. Lots of cars looked like that in the late 90s. Still, his chest tightened the way it had the first time he saw the video. He parked across the street and waited. 15 minutes. Nothing moved. Curtains still. No lights. No sound. Finally, he walked up the gravel driveway and knocked. Harold Pike answered after a long pause. Mid-40s, thin, sunburned skin from outdoor work, eyes that didn't quite hold contact. Bennett introduced himself calmly, like it was routine. Just following up on vehicles in the area that morning. Mind if I ask a few questions? Pike shrugged. Sure. Bennett asked where he'd been the day Emily disappeared. Pike said home mostly, fixing a fence, then hardware store around noon. Bennett asked if anyone could confirm that. Pike hesitated just a fraction too long. Not really. I live alone. Bennett asked about the wagon. Pike said it had transmission trouble, hadn't driven it in weeks. But when Bennett glanced toward the tarp, he noticed fresh gravel tracks leading to the tires. Not old, not dusty. Recent. Small details. Always the small ones. He didn't accuse, didn't push. Just thanked Pike and left. Because you don't tip your hand when you're not ready. That night, Bennett wrote everything down. Hesitation in timeline. Vehicle possibly recently driven. No witnesses. Still circumstantial. Still not enough for a warrant, but his instincts grew louder. Meanwhile, life inside the Harper house felt frozen in place. Emily's backpack still hung on the hook by the door. Her cereal bowl still sat in the cabinet exactly where she left it. Her mother refused to pack anything away. Said moving things felt like admitting Emily wasn't coming back. Daniel stopped playing outside. He sat at the window most afternoons, watching the street like he expected his sister to walk up the driveway any second. Kids at school stopped asking questions. Teachers stopped mentioning her name. That was the part that hurt most. How fast the world adjusted to her absence. On the 63rd day, Bennett went back to the traffic footage again. He slowed it, frame by frame. This time, he wasn't looking at the car. He was looking at shadows, the way the light hit the pavement. At exactly 8:13:27, the wagon paused, and for a split second, something shifted near the passenger door. A darker shape, small, too small to be an adult. It could have been a trick of light, could have been nothing. But when he zoomed in as far as the software allowed, he thought he saw the faint outline of movement, like someone climbing inside. His stomach dropped. If Emily had been forced into that car right there on Maple Street, it would have taken less than 5 seconds. 5 seconds was nothing. Less time than tying a shoe. Less time than turning to wave goodbye. 5 seconds was all it took for a life to split into before and after. Bennett leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen. If Pike was telling the truth, it was coincidence. If he was lying, then Emily hadn't vanished into thin air. She'd been taken by someone who lived 20 minutes away. Someone who might still be sleeping in the same bed every night. The next morning, Bennett requested surveillance. Unofficial at first, just drive-bys. Note when Pike left, note when he returned. See if the wagon moved. By day 3, they confirmed it. The tarp came off at dawn. The wagon left around 7:30 a.m. every morning, returned after dark. Transmission trouble didn't stop someone from commuting daily. Bennett circled the times on his notepad. 7:30 departure. Same time school traffic started. Same time kids walked to bus stops. The pattern wasn't proof, but it wasn't random either. And for the first time since Emily disappeared, Bennett felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Not hope. Something sharper than that. Direction. Because missing children cases rarely stayed mysteries forever. Sooner or later, someone slipped. Someone forgot a detail. Someone got careless. And when they did, all it took was one person paying close enough attention to notice. By the 3rd month, the investigation stopped looking like a missing child case and started looking like a quiet stakeout. No more volunteers, no more prayer circles on the school lawn. Just unmarked cars parked down back roads and officers pretending to drink cold coffee while watching the same house for hours at a time. Maple Grove had gone back to work, back to routine, back to pretending life was normal. But Officer Tom Bennett's world had narrowed to a single gravel driveway on the edge of town. Harold Pike's place. Every morning at 7:28 a.m., the same thing happened. The porch light flicked off. The front door opened. Pike stepped out carrying a thermos. He unlocked the pale blue station wagon. Engine started. Headlights on. Then he drove toward town at an unhurried pace, like any other person going to work. Too normal. That was what Bennett couldn't shake. Truly innocent people didn't look suspicious. But neither did careful ones. The wagon passed 3 separate bus stops on its route. Bennett timed it himself. From Pike's house to Maple Street took exactly 14 minutes. The same stretch of road Emily had walked every weekday for 2 years. If Pike left at 7:30, he'd reach the school area just after 8. Exactly when kids were arriving. Exactly when parents were distracted. Exactly when someone patient could wait, without anyone thinking twice. Bennett wrote the times down over and over, until they stopped looking like numbers and started looking like a pattern. At 8:12, the same minute the old traffic camera showed the wagon pausing at the curb. Back at the station, the detectives requested Pike's phone records. Nothing dramatic, no threatening calls, no known criminals, just silence. A prepaid flip phone with almost no activity. Cash payments, no paper trail. The kind of life that left very little behind. Too little. Bennett interviewed Pike's neighbors again. One mentioned something new. Said Pike sometimes worked late in the shed behind his house. Lights on past midnight, hammering sounds, scraping metal. The neighbor assumed it was tools or repairs. Bennett drove out that evening just after 10. From the road, he could see a faint glow through the cracks in the shed door. He parked with his lights off and watched. After 20 minutes, Pike came out carrying what looked like a shovel. Not strange on its own, lots of people own shovels. But Pike didn't head toward the garden or the yard. He walked past the shed toward the tree line behind the house, then disappeared into the dark. Bennett's pulse ticked faster. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, Pike came back alone, shovel muddy. He rinsed it with a hose, slow, careful. Like someone cleaning something they didn't want to explain. Bennett wrote everything down but didn't approach. Still not enough for a warrant. Suspicion wasn't probable cause. Not yet. But the space between suspicion and certainty was getting smaller every day. Meanwhile, the Harpers had started therapy. Not because they wanted to, because the school counselor insisted. Emily's mother barely spoke during the sessions. She stared at the carpet and twisted her wedding ring over and over. Daniel talked more than anyone expected. About dreams where Emily knocked on the door and nobody opened it. About feeling guilty for walking ahead of her that morning. About how sometimes he thought he saw her at the grocery store or the park, only to realize it was another girl with the same hair. The therapist wrote notes quietly. Loss does strange things to memory, she said. It makes the brain look for familiar shapes everywhere. Bennett hated hearing that. Because if Emily was still alive, she wasn't a shape or a memory. She was somewhere real, somewhere close. On the 89th day, they got the first real break. A gas station clerk from a neighboring town called the tip line said a man in a blue wagon had filled up with cash that Monday morning back in March. Early, around 7:15. The clerk remembered because the pump had jammed and he had to reset it. Bennett pulled the old receipt logs. There it was. Cash. $14.32. Timestamp 7:16 a.m. Pike's house was 10 minutes from that station. The timeline lined up too perfectly to ignore. Bennett finally had enough for limited surveillance and a property check request. Not a full search, but enough to step onto the land legally. Enough to look around. They planned to go at first light. That night, Bennett barely slept. Cases like this didn't get second chances. If he was wrong, Pike would sue the department and disappear. If he was right, then somewhere behind that house lay the answer everyone in Maple Grove had been afraid to face. At 6:03 a.m., two cruisers rolled quietly down Pike's Road. The sky still gray, air cold enough to fog their breath. Pike's wagon sat in the driveway under the tarp again. Too still, too quiet. Bennett stepped out and felt that same tightness in his chest, the feeling he'd learned not to ignore. Because sometimes the truth didn't announce itself with sirens or confessions. Sometimes it waited in ordinary places, in backyards, in sheds, in patches of freshly turned earth no one else would ever think to look twice at. And as Bennett walked toward the tree line where he'd seen Pike disappear the night before, the ground beneath his boots felt softer than it should have, like soil that hadn't settled yet, like something had been moved, something recent, something hidden. At 6:07 a.m., the air behind Harold Pike's house felt colder than the rest of the property. Not colder in temperature, colder in feeling. The kind of cold that settled under your skin and stayed there. Officer Tom Bennett stepped carefully past the shed, boots sinking slightly into damp soil, flashlight beam low and steady. Two deputies followed a few steps behind him. No one spoke. Gravel crunched too loud in the quiet morning. The tree line began about 30 yards from the house. Thin maples, patchy brush. Nothing dense enough to hide much. But the ground near the edge looked wrong. Bennett stopped. There's a difference between untouched earth and earth that's been disturbed and put back. Anyone who has dug a hole knows it. The color changes. The texture loosens. The surface never settles the same. About 6 feet across, the soil looked darker, recently turned. Grass half dead where roots had been cut. Bennett crouched and pressed a gloved hand against it. Soft. Too soft for early spring. He didn't want to think what that meant. Still, procedure came first. He called it in, requested a warrant expansion, requested forensics, requested the sheriff. Within 20 minutes, the quiet property filled with low voices and flashing lights. Pike stood on his porch in yesterday's clothes, watching it all unfold, face blank, hands at his sides. He didn't ask questions, didn't protest, didn't look surprised. That bothered Bennett more than anything else. Innocent people get loud. Innocent people get confused. Pike just watched. The warrant came through fast. Judges move quickly when children are involved. Crime scene tape went up around the patch of soil. A forensics tech began digging slowly with a small shovel. Not hacking. Careful. Layer by layer. Everyone stood back. No one wanted to breathe too hard. At about 18 inches down, the shovel hit something that didn't sound like dirt. A dull scrape. The tech stopped immediately and brushed away soil with his hands. Plastic. A blue tarp, folded tight. Bennett felt his throat close. For a second he couldn't move. For a second the world narrowed to that one square of ground. Because every missing child case balances on a terrible edge. Hope on one side, truth on the other. And once you cross it, there's no going back. They lifted the tarp together. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in fabric. Too small. Always too small. A child's purple backpack lay beside it, dirt-stained but intact. Bennett recognized it instantly from the flyers, from the hook by the Harper's door. Emily's. The world went very quiet. Even the birds seemed to stop. Procedure took over after that. Photos, measurements, evidence bags. The medical examiner worked carefully, respectfully. Time of death estimated within hours of the disappearance. Quick. Likely unplanned panic after the abduction. No signs she'd been moved again. She'd been here the whole time. Less than 20 minutes from her house. Less than 20 minutes from the street she walked every day. 12 years would pass before the full DNA confirmation came back, before technology advanced enough to match trace fibers in Pike's wagon and soil on his boots, and finally close every legal gap. But in that moment, standing in the early light with that purple backpack in the dirt, Bennett already knew. They hadn't lost her across the country. She hadn't vanished into some distant city. She'd been right here, all along. Pike was arrested quietly. No fight, no speech. He let them cuff him like someone stepping into a routine appointment. In the back seat of the cruiser, he stared straight ahead. Bennett watched him through the window and felt something close to anger rise in his chest. Not rage, something colder. The kind that stays with you for years. Because Pike hadn't looked like a monster. He looked like anyone. Like a neighbor. Like a man you'd nod to at the grocery store. That's what made it worse. When Bennett knocked on the Harpers' door that afternoon, he wished for the first time in his career that he didn't have to do this part. Emily's mother opened it and saw his face, and already knew. Parents always know. He didn't say much, didn't need to. Just that they'd found her, that she wasn't alone anymore, that they were bringing her home. She didn't scream, didn't faint. She just folded slowly to the floor like her legs had given up after holding too much for too long. Daniel stood behind her, gripping the door frame so hard his knuckles turned white. Later, when the town held another vigil on the school lawn, it looked different than the first one. No hopeful prayers, no posters, just candles and quiet. People stood shoulder to shoulder, not speaking. The crossing guard set a small purple ribbon on the curb where Emily had last been seen. Bennett stood in the back and watched the light flicker across familiar faces. 12 years. That's how long it took for the final lab reports, the court battles, the appeals, the official match that closed the case for good. 12 years before the paperwork finally caught up to what everyone felt that morning behind Pike's house. But sometimes justice doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes piece by piece. A blurry camera, a neighbor's memory, a car that paused just a second too long. One officer who refused to stop looking. Because children don't just vanish. Not really. Someone always sees something. Someone always knows something. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to notice the smallest detail everyone else walks past. Emily Harper disappeared in 1999 on an ordinary school morning. 15 years later, one officer noticed something no one else had. And that was enough to bring her home. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone, somewhere, may still be waiting to be heard.